Sable was created by the entity, or at least that's what this theory states. This is a theory I heard while listening to an iceberg video by Ozzy Mobs. This theory is mostly viewed as a joke, however I've never actually seen someone give it a fair shot. The whole basis for this theory is that Mikaela and Sable are supposed to be BFFs, a dynamic duo if you would. Peanut butter and jelly, ketchup and mustard, fries and hamburgers. What's with all the food? However, while Sable seems to be quite the Mikaela enjoyer, Mikaela never mentioned Sable once. If anything, Mikaela is more focused on her roommate Julian, and while it'd be incredibly funny if Sable just wasn't as close with Mikaela as she originally thought, the out-of-universe explanation is that Sable probably wasn't planned yet. But I only have one problem with that answer, and that it's incredibly lame. What's the in-universe explanation is what I really want to figure out. And at first glance, this theory seems to be just that. I've never seen someone actually give this theory a fair shot, so why not let me be the first? Let's start off with what we know, or at least what we think we know. Sable is a dummy-thick misfit who feels like she had to be adopted because she's not nearly as perky and upbeat as her mother, but not a boring golf-loving frat boy like her father. Her words, not mine. And while her lore is admittedly very cringe, this line in particular takes a whole new meaning under the lens of this theory. Apparently, nobody understood Sable in all of Greenville, except Mikaela. The Entibaby Theory, as I'm going to be calling this from now on, basically proposes the idea that Sable was made by the entity to be Mikaela's BFF, hinder her true potential, more on that later, and draw out more emotion for the entity to feed on during the trials. If we were to take this theory and apply it to her lore, then there is a lot that suddenly gets a lot creepier when put under this microscope. When I originally read Sable's lore for this video, the cringe was so strong you could feel it from space. Just sentences on sentences of the writer saying, Sable isn't like the other girls. She's into dark stuff. The darkness made sense to her. Like, calm down, Sable the Hedgehog. But that prattling off about the darkness might not be as much of a nothing burger as I originally thought. She's into the occult, has a literal entity tattoo on her thigh, more on that in a bit, is into bugs, which isn't that big of a red flag until you combine it with another bit of evidence, more on that later as well. It stated the dark side made sense to Sable, and she even reveled in it, partly because it freaked out those around her, but also because it felt like who she was, which is definitely an interesting thing to say in the Dead by Daylight universe, but okay. She also is probably a closet live leak enjoyer due to her obsession with extreme gore and blood. She enjoys the terror of it and loves feeling the adrenaline rush she'd get from seeing it in the horror movies. We'll be coming back to this later as well. The lore finally wraps up with her in a cellar encountering the same black fog that took Mikaela, but instead of feeling fear, she thinks about the potential killers, endless horror, and instead of feeling scared from the prospects of an eternity of suffering, she gets excited by it? What? Very questionable, but that's all the stuff we're outright told to us in the lore. Going back to the feeling that Sable felt like she was adopted, is it possible that she probably was? This is my weakest point since I have the least amount of proof, have no clue what Sable's parents look like, and this is 60% speculation and 40% actual evidence. So I'm getting it out of the way first. I see two possible conclusions that would work in DBD's lore while also making some semblance of sense. First theory is that Sable was influenced by the entity as she grew up to be the woman she is now. And the second theory is that Sable simply never existed in the first place, and her backstory was simply fed to her or imprinted into her so she'd be able to fulfill her purpose. Let's start with the first one, the one I have the least amount of confidence in. The entity is an omniversal, time-ignoring, spider-like monstrosity that is capable of ripping people from different points in time, whispering to them to influence their actions, manifesting itself in reality to either take or sway its target, such as when it manipulated tree branches to steal Kate, manifested itself as a bunch of crows in a place where crows aren't naturally found, shows up as the fog so often is literally referred to as the darkness by most in-universe characters who are aware of it, has access to an entire pocket dimension it uses as its trash can, and can straight up nerf canonically busted characters such as Vecna and Freddy. If the entity can do all of this, then how hard is it to believe that it influenced Sable in one way or another? Kate Denson, the poster girl for Stay Strong Carry On, got influenced by this thing in her lore. Her once uplifting and hopeful tunes got brought down with a sudden melancholic and dark feel to it. Of course, this is right before her disappearance and not over the course of her entire life, but it's still worth noting. And then there's the one that I personally would love to believe, which claims that Sable never existed in the first place. Which sounds kind of dumb, but there's actually some weight to it. If we go all the way back to the very thing that started this theory, the fact that Sable is not once mentioned in Mikaela's lore, then it starts to hold some water. Based on Sable's lore, she loves Mikaela, and literally entered the entity's realm not only to be tortured for eternity for some reason, but to also chase after her. As I've said before, nobody in all of Greenville understood her, but Mikaela. Yet despite this loving friendship, Julian is who Mikaela seems to care about. Sable is never brought up, never alluded to, and never fucking mentioned, and doesn't even make an appearance. And unlike the other survivors who are relatively close, like Leon and Claire, Leon and Ada, or the Lyra twins, neither Sable nor Mikaela say anything in the lobby. And I understand that Sable yaps in the lobby and Mikaela doesn't, but come on, you'd expect her to say anything at this point, or at least try to speak to her. Even if Mikaela can't speak but Sable can, you'd think Sable would try to say anything, right? If Behavior ever adds voice lines for Mikaela, they should really rectify that. There's also all the lore bits we mentioned earlier that paint a pretty sinister picture if you put them all together. Plus a few things I omitted for dramatic effect. That line about the darkness making sense to Sable, while incredibly edgy, does make a lot of sense under this context. The darkness makes sense to her, but why? Could it be that this is literally her home, or potentially a guiding force in who she is as a person? Sliding over to her prestige cosmetics, her bloody head literally calls her the Daughter of Darkness. And I get that the bloody headpiece is usually a summary of the character, such as Mikaela's bloody head summarizing her as a barista who also doubles as a live leak enthusiast, or Fang, who's summarized as a professional sweat who happens to be covered in human ketchup. I bring this up not because I enjoy painfully slogging through the blood web, but because if this is a summary of Sable, then in context with all the other evidence I've thrown down, what does this mean? Let's not forget that in the lobby, Sable will sometimes say, "This all feels very familiar." While this very well could be a side effect of the endless trials and the memory loss that occurs after them, it could also be because if this theory is right, this is her home. This is where she was created, or at least this is the thing that's been in her ear throughout her life. And on top of that, we have her not so subtle perks. Weaving spiders is the most damning one, since this is one of only 2 perks in the entire game to have a spider on it. The other one belongs to Evil Incarnate, so it's not looking good for her already. I'm calling attention to weaving spiders and Sable's apparent affinity for bugs because it being a spider is incredibly suspect. The entity seemingly always shows up as fog, crows, or spider-like claws. We see them on several of the perks like Ruin, Corrupt Intervention, and Crowd Control. And it's the giant abomination that takes you to Brazil after your 3rd hook state. Perhaps her affinity for bugs, and specifically spiders in this scenario, are linked to her ties to the entity. And just like many of the other bits of evidence I've provided, it's no big deal on its own, but when looked at collectively with all the other evidence present, it is pretty suspect. And then there's the fact that you're evoking something to begin with. Invoke can mean to call a spirit or deity, and in the entity's realm, the only spirit you'd get to talk to that isn't Rin Yamaoka or Sadako is the entity itself. And I know it's the entity because you have to go to the basement of all places, which is canonically the heart of the entity, or at least the closest we get to the heart of the entity. And when you're done with your little FaceTime with the entity, it permanently cripples you after lending its aid. It's a sort of deal with the devil, if you would. And Sable, being the survivor who introduced invocations with the entity to begin with, is a really bad look when combined with the other evidence present, and is especially bad when the only other survivor, as of right now with an invocation, is literally an evil cultist. You cannot make this up. The rest of her perks, Wicked and Strengthened Shadows, only further prove she has some kind of link to the entity, because she's at her strongest, again, in the heart of the entity, her progenitor, her creator, technically herself. There's also the fact that she seems to absolutely go crazy for gory horror, suffering, torture, and pain of all sorts. Not too different from the entity's favorite way of extracting hope and emotions for it to feed on. So how does this all tie back to Mikaela? Well, my lovely little candle, as the theory states, Sable was made to keep Mikaela's power in check, and also draw out more emotion for the entity to consume. The emotion part is easy. Having a best friend die throughout the trials would probably sting, and sting a lot, especially with the memory loss that occurs afterwards. So she'd see her friend die, go back to the campfire, meet them all over again, and then see them die again, without ever knowing that this has already happened a few hundred times. The power thing is a tad harder to explain. Basically, Mikaela is the first survivor to bring boons to the realm, using her witchcraft and, I don't know, barista abilities to bless the totems. And as much as I hate Mikaela for making the boon meta a thing, she would canonically be pretty damn powerful. Boons are the pure antithesis to hexes, and maybe without restrictions, Mikaela could be the key to escaping the realm. Finally, she has some sort of entity tattoo on her thigh that I mentioned earlier. However, I don't really know what it means. It's present on the palm of Hag's friend when she dies, and according to this Pixel Bush Reddit post, it's also in Elodie's lore as well, but I'm too lazy to look. And I think that's everything. In the end, I didn't expect there to be this much evidence. I had a lot of fun working on this video as well. And while on its own, each piece sounds pretty forgettable and harmless, the sheer magnitude of it does raise an eyebrow. Do I think Sable was made by the entity? It sounds funny, so yes. Either way, if you want to say hi or just add any comments on what I said today, please share them down below. Consider subscribing or dropping a follow on Twitch or joining the Discord if you truly love my content. And as usual, I am terrible at outros. Bye bye!